The theory of constraints is not a new concept. Matter of fact, it's been around for about 25 years. A gentleman named Eli Goldratt came up with this concept and popularized it through a book called The Goal. The Goal is still in print today. It is worldwide, and you can even get it in a comic book or watch it on YouTube. And I highly recommend you take the time. It's an easy read, it's an easy watch, and you can even get the comic book in Japanese. I know this because I saw it at the Theory of Constraints conference in September down in Salt Lake. Okay, so let's get started. Theory of constraints is basically the concept that any process is only as strong as its weakest link. Think of a chain, and then the chain has links. The weakest link actually determines the strength of the overall chain. Despite the other chains being made with titanium, platinum, you name it, if that one link is weak, that is the limiting factor. So first, we want to identify the constraint in our process. Now, how do we do that? If you watched our earlier video talking about how we set up a process machine, you might remember that we had some gates set up. And we could start very simple by having some gates set up here. And we'll just use 4 for this particular example. And we identify the constraint by identifying where the whip is stacking up in that process. So in this case, if we had some whips stacked up here, you might immediately see that there is a lot of whip in gate 4. That's where we identify a possible constraint, and then once we identify the constraint, we want to see if we can fix it with some kind of continuous process improvement and get your black belts or your green belts involved in this place to help you see if you can bust this constraint. Some of the ways that we can bust this constraint is by using the theory of constraints. Has some focusing steps. You just learned the first one. It's called ID the constraint. So first, once we ID the constraint, then what we want to do is we want to exploit that constraint. What do we mean by exploiting? We want to get the most out of that constraint. That's what exploiting means, getting the most out of the constraint. If gate 4 is where our constraint is, and CPI cannot do any process improvement to fix it, now we're going to have to manage it. So we're going to exploit it by never letting this process go idle. How do we do that? Well, it might be that we have to add some extra shifts or extra people. If it's a machine, we never want it to stop working. So maybe we're going to have to work on how do we keep this running 24/7, if that's possible. But we want to never let that particular constraint go idle. That's how you exploit it. Then what we want to do is then we want to subordinate to that constraint. That means we never want to go faster than the part in your process that is constrained. So we can, once we've figured out that there's a constraint, we only want to go as fast as that thing. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's say we have some processes, and we'll start here. And this is A, B, C. These are just steps in a process now. Nothing earth-shattering here. And let's say that A can go and do 10 things per hour. Doesn't matter. Lines of code, changing tires, writing a page. It doesn't matter. Just 10 things. This one can do 10. This one can do 5. This one can do 20. And this one can do 15. So that sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not. In this particular process, where would our constraint be? It'll be the limiting one. This is our constraint. It can only go 5 things per hour. So, in order to subordinate to that, it doesn't matter what D and E can go. they're only going to go as fast as C, because C can only do 5 per hour. So it will only feed D 5 per hour, and that limits D to do 5 per hour for E. But we can do 10 here. Let's do 10, right? It's important to keep everybody busy, all machines running. But if we do 10 here and 10 here, and this can only do 5, what are we going to see? We're going to start seeing a bunch of whips stacking up in front of the constraint. There. Remember when we talked about the process machine identifying our constraint? Here again, this is where we see the manifestation of a slow process. There's no reason for these to go 10 if that can only go 5. So we subordinate by only having these guys go 5. Now that might be counterintuitive because we don't want to waste time. We don't want things to go idle. But what you're actually doing here by making these go faster than your constraint is you're creating waste. You're using people that could be doing something else. You are piling up material that's going to drive cost in front of a constraint because there's warehousing costs, material costs. We have to make sure it's controlled. It doesn't walk off because sometimes that happens. We only want to make sure that there's 5 going to C. And then the whole process can go 5. Now, if, for an example, we do a CPI event, right? Let's do a CPI event. These guys can do 10, guess what? Now they can do 20. Did we improve anything? No, we didn't. C can only do 5. Well, let's do another CPI event. And we can do another one, and now this one can do 30, and this one can do 30. Holy mackerel. Maybe you get an award for doing a CPI event, but did you improve anything for the process? You didn't, because this one's still stuck at 5. And this is the thought from theory of constraints. Why go faster than your constraint? You just get a traffic jam. It's just like being on a road. If the person in front of you can only go 60 miles an hour in the fast lane, guess what? You're automatically subordinated. And all the people behind you that are trying to go faster start to pile up and you get a traffic jam. This is what happens out on a work floor, on your desk, any kind of work, it starts to stack up. So subordinating is not going any faster than your constraint. And remember that we've already exploited the constraint by making sure it never goes idle. The next step then is to expand the constraint. Now sometimes it's also called elevate. Elevate, expand, really the same concept. It doesn't matter, they're used interchangeably. Here, if we have this particular process and it's only doing 5 things, no matter what we've done, now we know that we're not meeting the customer requirement, we have to take other steps. This is where the expand comes into it. This is where we have to discuss how we're going to expand it, and it typically means that we need to advocate for additional resources. We have to hire people. We have to buy more equipment. If it's a grinding machine, and the grinding machine can only do 5 per hour, and that's it, and we need 10, now we need a second grinding machine. And if we were to add that second grinding machine, then we could add C2 here at 5, and that actually gives us a whole operation of 10. Now this process has actually doubled its output through expansion. In some cases we can't buy or hire, so sometimes we have to contract out. We don't always like to do that, but that is also another option when you're thinking about expanding. This requires us to advocate for that solution and get resources and money and approval. Then the last step is repeat. Yes, I know. We're going to have to do it all over again. Art of the possible and theory of constraints is not a one and done. This is a way we manage our business and think about our problems daily. And this is not an AFSC, Air Force, government thing. If you are able to go to some place like the Theory of Constraints conference, you will see that this is a methodology being used worldwide. You think about Japan's Toyota production system. Think about Honeywell operating system, GM, BF Goodrich, Delta Airlines, Boeing. They're all using these types of methodologies. It's never one and done. So once we have figured out where our constraint is by IDing it, and we've gotten the most out of it by exploiting it, and then we've subordinated the whole system so we don't create more waste, and it still doesn't meet our requirements, now we expand. Once we've expanded, we continue to monitor the process, and we repeat by going up to the beginning and looking for our next constraint and starting to apply CPI and all the steps of theory of constraints. And there you go. Theory of constraints made simple.